All right, good afternoon, or rather, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Modjeska School for Human Rights. Tonight, of course, we're going to continue diving a bit deeper into the intersection of history, theory, strategy, and tactics when it comes to organizing in modern day South Carolina. And one of the things that you really want to think about when it comes to the progressive network is that the strategies and tactics, of course, change to fit the circumstances, but the theory and analysis that drive said strategy and tactics always remain constant. And so tonight we're going to get into the very recent history of the progressive network, thinking about what's occurred in the state of South Carolina over the last 30 years to both necessitate the creation of the progressive network and to also give a greater clarity to the kinds of forces that activists are facing in this state right now as we speak. Of course, as we all know, we've already learned in the last few classes, organizing for human and civil rights in South Carolina has never been a walk in the park. Far from it, as a matter of fact. But it's really important for all of us to understand the kinds of forces that are arrayed against freedom in this state and that have been there for a long time. And so tonight's class is a combination of the history of the last 30 years, but also a reflection on the kinds of tactics and strategies that have really been used and created by members of the progressive network, and really giving a greater sense of how this fight has gone on in South Carolina over the last 30 years or so. Brett?
Thank you, Dr. Green, and we are blessed to have Dr. Green as our faculty coordinator. He's finishing his second year. Is it second year at Claflin or third year, Robert? Third year, and we work him hard, and we're blessed to have him. We've got some guests tonight that I'll introduce shortly when we bring them on. But I do want to say that I'm going to be doing most of the talking because I have, for better or worse, been the executive director since before the founding of the South Carolina Progressive Network. And Rebecca Robbins, our communications director, and full disclosure, my wife. She was a communications director before she was my wife, but it's been a long road that we have been on, a winding road. And it's not for a lack of wanting to turn loose of the operation. It's not much money. And as Robert pointed out, it's a really hard job. But one of the things that we want to communicate tonight is the value of the Progressive Network, because this is your organization. And if you don't appreciate the value of it, we've wasted our time. And we want to turn it over. And that part of that is the purchase of that building for the Modjeska School right next door to her house and starting the Modjeska School. We started discussions about the school in 2014 and 2015. We did our first class, and this is the sixth year that we've done it. We've graduated 5 classes, average of about 25 people a class. We've only taken 30 each class because we were meeting face to face. And last year we went Zoom after we started. But this year, the 2021 class is the first one that we advertised on Zoom. And we knew that we needed to do this someday and go distance learning because we can't just be Columbia centric and have only the people that can come. So we're going to continue doing that, but we'll also someday, not too long from now, and certainly by next spring, be able to have both a virtual class in our school building next door to Modjeska's, as well as Zoom it. And so we really do appreciate y'all being here on this transitional phase. And I wanted to start out with bringing my good friend Phil Leventis. Some people know him as Senator Leventis. He was a senator in the South Carolina legislature from 1980 to 2012, which I think is 32 years. Is that right, Phil?
That's
A
correct.
long time. And Phil lives in Sumter. Was a senator from Sumter. And I became aware of Senator Leventis when we were doing the newspaper Point. And the Point was sponsored by the same 501c3 that was our sponsor at Grow. It's the Natural Guard. The Natural Guard we started in 1978 as our fiscal sponsor to support the work that we could get grants for. And we were doing a lot of environmental work. And it crossed my radar screen that this white liberal Democrat down living on the shores of Lake Wateree was opposed to this toxic waste dump that they built right on the shores of Lake Wateree, and it wasn't a very good idea. And so that's how I met Phil, and also how I met Joe Neal. We'll talk about that later. But Phil, you came in at a time when you were watching the redistricting that changed the complexion, literally, of the legislators. And could you just kind of walk us through very briefly the, 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 the number of times that there was a redistricting in 1990 and how we learned from that today, so many years later, with another redistricting coming up, and what kind of hand we've been dealt by the rules that we follow?
Well, I got to the legislature in early 1981 and served until 2013, and went through, if you count it, if every 10 years, that should have been 4 redistrictings, but instead I went through 5. Didn't know anything about redistricting when I got there. And when I got there, we had a multi-Senate district. There were 2 of us that represented our district, Sumter and Clarendon, with numbered seats. Then we went to single member districts, and in 1984, we had the second redistricting in 1990, and that's one we ought to talk about, 91 actually. But to give you an example of how self-serving, because it's all done by the legislature, and it's all about the legislators protecting their position. When I say the legislators, I mean Republican and Democrat, old guys and new guys. In 2000, we had redistricting after the Republicans took the majority in the Senate. The Senate has 46 members. After the election, it was 23-23, and the senator who had served for 24 years at that time as a Democrat switched. And but the interesting thing is that after the redistricting in 2001, the next Senate election wasn't until 2004. And so one day I was surprised when reapportionment was back on our agenda, and we redistricted again. And both of them were, of course, very favorable to the incumbents, especially Republican incumbents and any Republican challengers. But the idea that you can only do redistricting once, I thought that was the case, isn't the case. In 1990, there were a lot of personal agendas involved. And so what happened effectively was that the minority districts were made very safe, and districts like mine, which is an influence district, minority influence district, were insulated because I was surrounded by majority minority districts. But in the upstate especially, and you have to understand that, and you probably do, that redistricting in the upstate impacts people all over the state, because when the lines move, the only lines that can't be moved are the state lines, that it ripples through the state. But there was so much self-interest in the 1990 reapportionment that the state was walled off into little areas where the incumbents would win, and the only question was if you could beat an incumbent within your own party. Interestingly, in the past, that was a general question. Now, it's primarily a question for Republicans. The far right of the Republican Party is so prevalent in some of these very specially made districts for incumbents that friends of mine who had served for 20, 25 years got beaten not from the left, not from the center, but from the right of their party. A serving chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Larry Martin, was beaten in 2000, I guess 12 or I think 2012, 2016. Anyway, sum and substance is that redistricting is very important to our democracy, but yet it's in the hands of serving legislators, and I would say, and I hate to be cynical, but self-serving legislators. And the alliances sometimes are made among party members from different parties. We've really got to get out of the hands of legislators, because it's just can't work well that way. It could in the old days, in the days when there was work across party lines. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
Phil, you were, the people don't know it, but you were our salesperson for the Fairmaps campaign, which is the Citizens Redistricting Commission that we know that the Republicans aren't going to give up power. We know the Supreme Court has said they're not going to save us. It doesn't look like the Democrats are going to pull off legislation that would save us. With that, they had legislation that could have ended the safe districts. But you're a fan of fair maps, and that's like a heavy lift. Are you still optimistic that someday, Lord, people are going to realize that's an option?
The trend nationally is toward this, but it's a small and a slow trend. Let me be quite honest. The Democrats in Maryland are not going to give up power either. I agree with them on the things that they try to do. I share their values. It doesn't make it right. I think it's Iowa and now California that are among some that are done by commissions with a charge, and this is an important charge, to make all the districts as competitive as possible so that the citizens will have to get engaged and determine who it is they want to represent them.
Yeah, let me sum up where we are with our effort to affect the redistricting. We started out in 2018 in introducing legislation to create a citizens commission as opposed to a commission that was appointed by the legislature, which may or may not happen if they do anything. And there's a lot of pressure, but they might, if the legislature does something, we know that it's not going to fix the problem of giving up power. The only way we could do that would be to take the power away from them. And since we can't put something on the ballot, we can't do what California, Arizona, and other states have done. And so this idea of using a citizen's petition from a county level to actually basically force the legislators by having registered voters in their districts say, we don't want you to draw the lines. It's something that I think we're going to have to probably go through another opportunity to get screwed by legislators that are incumbents and want to save seats. That's what's going to be happening in the next year and a half now. We will be working on trying to figure out ways to engage in the RIG process in a productive way. The legislature is set in stone.
Let me say something. Ms. Gaynor asked a question. She thought that redistricting was once every 10 years. How did it happen that it happened twice in 4 years? And the answer is whoever is in charge of the legislative agenda can put it on the agenda. That's the answer, Ms. Gaynor.
Yeah, and the good news is that we're not locked into just doing it one time in 1991 or two, because it doesn't look like we're going to get favorable results this time around. But we can come back with this plan that we're referring to as the Fair Maps plan, which uses a county level initiative process to take control of it sometime between now and 2030, or by God, we'll do it in 2030. It's a good plan. We didn't have the capacity, the money, and the people to make it work this time. And so it's got to be sold, and people have to appreciate the need for it. But we're not giving up on it. We really do appreciate Phil Leventis' assistance with it. And we're go to fairmapssc.com, see what we're doing. We will be providing some direction for people to look at local, county council, and city redistricting. There's a whole lot of problems there that could be used for local organizing, and we'll be doing a seminar on that probably the next month and a half. So Phil, stay tuned. We're going to move on, but we've got more for you to comment on. We wanted to talk about what happened after the 1990 election with Joe Neal and Gilda Cobb-Hunter came in 1992. Joe was elected at a special election to fill a seat, so he came in slightly after Gilda, but they were both serving in the 2013 session. And we had been at the grassroots organizing workshop GROW with a building and operation from 77 till 92. I don't know how long that is. So we were looking for people like Joe and Gilda. And as I mentioned, we met Phil over an environmental issue. We met Joe. He came to our radar screen fighting a Superfund dump in his neighborhood out on Bluff Road. And Gilda made herself quite apparent when she came into the legislature and speaking truth to power. I will introduce Gilda. She's going to be joining us soon, but I'll introduce her when she comes in, because she can correct me if I say something wrong, and she will. But when they came in, this is really important, folks. I'd been doing organizing in South Carolina as a paid thing in 68, 69 for the Southern Student Organizing Committee. I knew people in Georgia that were legislators that were radicals. Julian Bond, Hosea Williams, Andy Young. Andy Young wasn't quite as radical, but he worked for SNCC. These are all people out of SNCC, the SCLC. And that there was nothing like that in South Carolina. We didn't even have any black elected officials until 1970. And they were the ones that were chosen by the Democratic Party. They let three black people come in only when they were threatened by a petition that put the United Citizens Party on the ticket, on the ballot, to be able to run black people for seats in the legislature for the first time since since the radical Reconstruction in 1868. And so the door had been closed by the white supremacist party at the time was the Democrats. That's when I graduated from high school, and Phil was there, and that was the Democrats ran the show. They were white. They controlled it. And so that when Joe and Gilda came in '92, it was really wonderful for those of us that had been in the trenches for a long time, and that there were no lefty black elected officials like there were in Georgia, but in North Carolina, there were substantive student organizations and community organizations that were radical up there. Of course, now there's 7 cities in North Carolina, larger than the largest city in South Carolina. So the population differences and the monetary differences and the location of colleges has a lot to do with it. But also, I think that there is a negative element that needs to be considered about the fact that we were the only colony that was started as a slave economy. And that heavy hand of white supremacy has been present in South Carolina since before the beginning of the state. The smart people left. And so we've had a brain drain that's been going on for quite some time. So when Joe and Gilda came in, it was wonderful. We started working with them immediately and helping them. And one of the things that we've developed, we being the Progressive Network and Joe and Gilda and their comrades in the legislature, is they formulated a progressive caucus in the legislature that didn't get formalized until maybe 2015 or 16. But there was people that they worked with that were close to us, that were our age, that had been through the civil rights movement, that were grew up in segregated South Carolina. Those people are pretty well gone now. But that during the time when Joe and Gilda came in, the legislative delegation, the Black Caucus, wasn't really together. And one of the things people don't appreciate or understand about the House of Representatives in South Carolina, there's no staff unless you can afford it yourself. There's no help. There is no party, because when you're in '92, they hadn't quite become the minority party, but as Phil pointed out, the pendulum was swinging, and the Christian Coalition, I refer to it dismissively, and I apologize for those that I might offend, but the Christian Coalition was kind of like the Tea Party, but it was on Jesus. The Tea Party on Jesus came in with very conservative and frankly, racist positions that scared the heck out of everybody, became a very dominant force. 1994 was the Gingrich Revolution, the Republican Revolution that took the House of Representatives. David Beasley was elected governor. After young David, became a legislator when he was 20 years old at the University of South Carolina. And he then decided to be a Republican so he could be more important than he could be as a Democrat. And so in '94, the Republicans took the House and the governor's office, and by 2000 they had the Senate. And that the Christian Coalition was a tremendous force at the time, and it was kind of like you had to have their blessing. It's kind of like now you got the Trumpistas. A few years back, Nikki Haley had the Tea Party, but that's that same kind of pandering to the base, so to speak. That it's the faithful that will turn out in the primaries and make sure that you win. And so that David Beasley was the governor when I got to speak at the hanging of the Modjeska Simkins portrait, and that was about 1994 or 5, and he had been opposed. He had been opposed to taking the flag down off the dome, and that after we put Modjeska's picture, and I quoted Modjeska about the flag with him sitting right next to me in a joint session in the House chambers. I quoted Modjeska saying, "Leave the damn rag up there. I'd rather see the Klan in sheets than in suits." As long as that flag flies from the top of that building, you know what's in the hearts of the people inside. A couple of weeks later, David had a change of heart, and we think the Modjeska got to him. But they, we went on to start beginning the talking about the need for a progressive network in South Carolina after the '94 election. And that we were using not a proper noun, capital P, capital N. We were using just the generic term of a progressive network. And that one of the things that we recognized that was we needed to do that the Christian Coalition had done was the hard part of actually going to their party precinct meetings, getting elected, going to the county meetings, getting elected to the state convention, and getting on the executive committee. So the Christian Coalition did that. They had more discipline, but their agenda is much narrower than ours. And so they had the discipline to be able to take over the state Republican executive committee. And that in '95, we got a grant. The Natural Guard Fund applied for a grant to develop a statewide progressive network. And that in '96, we had our founding conference at Penn Center. And Tom Summers and Becky, I don't know who else is with us that was there. I know Tom was there and Becky was there. If anybody else was there.
Brett, the Honorable Representative Cobb-Hunter has joined us.
The Honorable Representative Cobb-Hunter is still very honorable and representing Orangeburg. And Gilda, we're going to talk about that founding conference that you were at, but we just finished talking about you coming into the legislature with Joe for that session that started in '93. And you want to say something about the coming in before we start talking about Penn Center?
Sure, just a minor correction, Brett. Let me, hey y'all, how's everybody? Glad to be a part of the conversation tonight. Joe joined me in the legislature. I was a part of a special election, something called Operation Lost Trust, and was elected to the General Assembly in January of 1992. Joe got elected November of '92 and served starting in January of '93. But he and I had been knowing each other. I'd been engaged in some of his losing campaigns. So that's probably why it felt like we all came together. But I look forward to the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Let me tell folks, I don't know if they don't know you, they ain't from here. But Gilda is a master social worker who came here when her husband, Terry, got a job at State. And Terry's an artist. Is that right, Gilda?
Yes, sir.
Let's speak. And she started CASA, which is a CASA Family Services that provides counseling and shelter for people with domestic abuse relationships. And they've gone on to do a lot of other good health-related and family-related things. But I've often thought that if there was a harder job than being a legislator, a Black woman legislator, it would be a Black woman doing what she's doing in Orangeburg. And so she comes in tough, okay? And I've seen Gilda, you can disagree with Gilda, but you respect her. And that's the kind of relationship she has in the legislature. And so Representative Cobb-Hunter, we're going to talk about the founding conference at Penn Center. And then Reverend Summers is with us. He was there. You were there.
Tom, hey, Tom. Oh, sorry.
And Gilda, and Becky was there. And if anybody else was there, say so. But Daniel, show this slideshow and we can talk kind of over it because you're going to see some people and I can't control it. So you're going to have to stop.
Oh,
That's Tom Turnipseed and Kamaya Marsharia. Don't put it on auto, but let me tell you to turn the page there. Turn the page. And just keep going there until I say stop. That's Willie Leggett, who was a professor at State and still is. That's the Frizzell Hall at Penn Center, where Dr. King had many fine meetings there. And the last one that he had, I think it was in 66, excuse me, with his staff at his SCLC staff that we talk about in the school. And go ahead and turn it, keep going. This is the main hall in Frizzell, and this is our first meeting. And a fellow there on the right is John Hickey, who came up from Missouri, and they had started a progressive network, but that it was electorally oriented, and they have a very strong labor movement in Missouri. And so he was saying it wouldn't work if we had everybody from, people that were concerned about welfare and housing and gay people, et cetera. He said, that's not going to work. Next. Well, there's Gilda. There's Gilda. Go back to that one with Gilda and Joe. Oh, no. I don't know what happened. That's Gilda.
That's it. That's Joe.
And there's a very slender Brett. We were young and cute. But go on, Daniel. Becky, you chime in here if you've got something to add, because I'm keep moving. Keep moving. These are discussions outside. Penn Center is an absolutely gorgeous place. We'll go back there. That was Jerome Smalls there in the background there of that picture. Jerome is a well-known and famous activist from Charleston. And that's discussion groups in the outside. We would break and form caucuses and go outside and discuss issues we needed to vote on. And there's Joe Neal, Tom Turnipseed, and Wilma Neal. Is Wilma with us tonight? Wilma, Gilda, you need to know that Wilma's been a really attentive student this year.
Good.
Yeah. Continue. Keep going. And there's Becky and Brett again. Well, you go back to that picture of that cute couple. Now, the good news is that you've had Brett and Becky from the beginning. And the bad news is you've had Brett and Becky from the beginning. We've been identified as the greatest asset of the Progressive Network and the greatest liability, because we keep doing stuff. And now we can't afford to replace ourselves. And so we need everybody's help to make this thing work. So, Gilda, do you have some thoughts about that original conference? Did it meet your expectations? Were you disappointed? Were you enthused? Did we fulfill anything?
It was, listen, that was like going back down memory lane, looking at those pictures and looking at some folk who unfortunately are no longer with us. But it's good for me to see all of that, because it keeps reminding me of why I do this, or have done it for almost as many years, Brad, as you and Becky have been doing it. But let me just say, as far as that first retreat and the founding of it, it was really important to those of us who were there, because, and as Brett said, Terry and I moved here from Ohio for him to accept a job at South Carolina State. And it was real different. And this is no offense or whatever to native South Carolinians, but it's real difficult sometimes for people moving into this state. It was back then, you're talking late 70s when we came here. And the point is, it was a great feeling because you were around people, some native South Carolinians, some not, who really came together around values that were important to us and core issues that we thought were worth fighting for. So as a non-South Carolinian, a part of what was so appealing about the network and about that first conference there at Penn Center was a reaffirmation of some things that I held dearly, and just an opportunity to be around people with similar philosophies, but not just to talk, but to actually strategize about how one could impact public policy. So it was refreshing for me, because I'm not into symbolism. I'm more into substance. And the network back then and up to this point has always allowed an opportunity for legislators and public policy wonks who want to, because I've not always been a legislator, but I've always been an organizer. It has provided an opportunity for strategy and for impact and policy. So that was a way longer answer than the question, but hey.
We want to hear from you, Gilda. And that one of the things, I don't know if you heard, I was setting it up, and you put your finger on it again. People, I haven't done the poll of how many people on the thing tonight, Daniel. The last time I looked was what?
48.
48 people.
It's a good number.
I don't know how many of them are from South Carolina. And this is one of the things, we can have a meeting and ask for people in South Carolina to raise their hands. There's 3 people. And so one of the things that people have to understand is we're Southern by the grace of God and stupid by choice. That the reason that people leave here when they get smart enough to be able to get a bus ticket or plane ticket or a scholarship to a school out of state is because of that repressive nature that you identified. And so the value of the progressive network and the rareness of it is something that I want you guys, this is a new class of 40-something people, this is yours. Please take care of it and use it. And so, Tom Summers, you were there with us.
Yeah.
What you
Oh,
remember?
look at Tom.
You remember that we all agreed that racism was the biggest problem, but we kind of broke down on the gay stuff and the labor stuff. And what was your takeaway of when it was happening? That kind of uncomfortable thing about fighting what was important, and then what'd you walk away with?
I'm one of those people who are homegrown. I'm a South Carolinian. As a matter of fact, it feels like home week with Gilda and Dr. Green. I'm from Orangeburg, South Carolina. I grew up in the mid 1930s into the 40s and early 50s. So I got a front row seat about Jim Crow laws and segregation and white supremacy. And I lived a life of privilege away from all these concerns. And then when I left Orangeburg, and my career was basically involved with being a director of clinical chaplaincy and supervisor of clinical pastoral education at the state hospital. Had a 35-year career there. And I believe it was, there were the patients on these back wards that society had neglected through the decades that I was involved with mental health, forgotten, housed there. And once my heart was touched by those societal concerns, I tried to integrate my pastoral care with social issues from then on. And I've been involved, with peace marches, peace trains, presentations in the former Czechoslovakia and other places where there were international concerns about pastoral care and social justice. So when the Penn Center got going, it was just really right up my alley in terms of that wonderful heritage about the center being a part of where Martin Luther King Jr. came for respite, renewal, and further deepening his dedication. And so, wow, what a place to hang out with people who, like Gilda was saying, who have some of the same notions that you have, and so where your heart rests with that social care. And Brett, I think you and I became involved right about the time the Progressive Network was getting going with the black burning of churches throughout the state, Sumter, Clarendon County, and other places. And we were working some with a group of clergy there in Sumter with that issue. And so I got to know you in those foundational years. And I don't know what else I could say about I think GROW, the grassroots organizing workshop, kind of preceded the Progressive Network, and I think the network kind of grew a little bit out of those concerns, but there were many other groups like the Carolina Peace Resource Center and others that were forming a lot of stuff over the Savannah River site about nuclear disarmament and marching for peace, those kinds of things. So I think the Penn Center start was just a hallmark in my own memory forever. And so,
well, Tom, do you remember the debate about not including the gay issues in that initial meeting?
Yeah. Well, I think the Progressive Network needs to take a lot of credit for behind the scenes supporting a lot of the LGBTQ folks in their start. I know they got going with the Pride March in about 1990 and became very invested with Harriet Hancock and her work and getting going with the LGBT folks. And we got together a group of people, clergy and friends, we called it, supporting lesbians and gays. Back then, you didn't have that LGBTQ term. You just had
Mhm.
lesbians and gays. And so I think the first Pride March, there were death threats given throughout the state about how dare these people who should be marginalized show their stuff. So I think the SLED, that first Pride March, SLED had to be there with some of the police department people on top of the buildings in downtown Columbia because of the death threats. I know when our clergy group got together and clergy and allies to support that effort, while there were sidewalk preachers going up and down the sidewalks, throwing all kind of vindictive theologies at us, and it just went against their whole belief system. So, wow, I think Progressive Network is something else, and the rootage into that Penn Center time should never be forgotten.
Well, thank you, Tom. And didn't hear you mention that you're a United Methodist minister. If you did, and these folks, these United Methodist ministers, were a real beacon of civilization and sanity in the early '60s, and they were the people that fought their own denomination and their own regional operation for the integration of the Methodist Church.
Well, all religious faith groups need to be on the alert because the sweep of conservatism is sweeping not only through political systems, but also through religious systems. And right now, United Methodist Church has slipped backwards into almost a split around the LGBT issue, sadly. That's just how far behind some denominations are with progressivism.
Well, thank you, Tom. Loretta asked if there were any black churches burned in Orangeburg, and I don't know the answer to that, Loretta, but maybe Tom does, or we'll get back to that for you.
I would like to put one comment here about what Tom said, and it deals with the notion of being a conservative wing of the church. Let's admit it's reactionary. They are not conservatives. They have no values that I agree. Well, they have values I agree with, but most of the values, many of the values I disagree with very strongly. But they're not conservatives. They embarrass the people who truly do want to conserve life and love and all these in our,
I agree with you on that. Yeah.
I just had to chime in with that. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
You saved me from saying it, Phil. Thank you. I want to now talk about what we created at Penn was a 501c3, which is a nonpartisan organization that can take grant money because you can write it off in your taxes. So that's the difference between just a different type of corporation, and the 501c3 is prohibited from being involved in electoral politics. That's where we started. And we had, I think there were 28 organizations at the table in the beginning. And within a few years, we probably had as many as 60 organizations that were participating in our network. Keeping in mind, this was before the web. We actually, at Grow, we'd started a print shop in 1981 because that's the way people communicated then. They printed pieces of paper like Gutenberg did and handed them to people. And so that we had a newspaper that we started in 1991, The Point. And all of that was heading in the direction of trying to do the educational work and the organizing work necessary to build a progressive movement. And so we knew we needed a progressive network. We had a print shop, we had a newspaper, and then as we got the progressive network going in '96, Becky's never forgiven me because she came to work at the Point newspaper in '91, and she's a master journalist and quite competent at what she's doing. But we couldn't keep all the balls in the air at the same time, and we couldn't keep the newspaper going after 2000, in part because the printed world was being diminished by the online world. And so there was a point at where we realized that the people we've been printing for and the people that we were networking with didn't need the type of networking in the printing that we were doing. And so that's a transition that we still have to come to peace with in terms of how we move forward in communicating with people. But the C3 that we started, also by the next year, we started a political action committee of individuals, the Progressive Voter Coalition. And that we did that in '97. And so ProVote's what we called it. And ProVote we could make endorsements because we weren't the Progressive Network. And so we would make endorsements and would support people that agreed with us. And we did that for probably 9 years, I think it was, and saw some futility in that because we were at a point where, as the competition and the gerrymandering made it more clearer and clearer that you could change who was sitting in the Democratic seat, but you couldn't really change from Democrat to Republican or Republican to Democrat because of the gerrymandering. And so there was this penchant simply to endorse everybody that agreed with you, and they would either win or lose, but it really wasn't changing anything. And so I think that our electoral perspective became more mature, and in 2006, we created a different corporate structure for individual memberships, and they changed the name of the C3, that's the organization that is nonpartisan. We added the words Education Fund on the end of it. So the South Carolina Progressive Network Education Fund is who's bringing you this program this evening. The Education Fund sponsors the school, it sponsors our research, it sponsors our policy work, it sponsors our educational work, it can sponsor voter mobilization, voter protection, but it can't endorse candidates, and it can only spend a small percentage of its money on actually promoting specific legislation. So the individual members, which all of you should be, can actually endorse candidates. And so our electoral functions started getting more specific. And in 2000, and I think it was right 2002, Representative Cobb-Hunter was the Democratic National Committee person for South Carolina. You can't be more inside than the DNC rep for your state. There were only two then. And so we came up with what we call the inside-outside strategy. We don't want a Democratic Party incorporated that is driven by money. We want people. The people, the rank and file Democrats are so much more progressive than the corporate structure. And I mean, you've seen the national conventions, and all the signs of the advertisers are pretty much the same in both conventions. They have been in the past, and it's still true that the two big law firms in South Carolina, the McNair firm and the Nelson Mullins firm, they make maximum donations to both parties, and they never lose because they always win. And so the whole notion of democracy and civilization and being corrupted by money is something that we have been very aware of since the beginning. And so the work that we've been doing within the Democratic Party was to get the people, not the corporate structure. And so we started a progressive caucus of the South Carolina Democratic Party in 2002, and Gilda and I and Joe Neal would help, and we had breakfast for our caucus members before the conventions, or like 7 o'clock in the morning. And we ended up having like 250 delegates at events. Nobody else was having, that. And we ended up being able to control the floor of the conventions because the majority of the delegates were Black women. That's the largest constituent group of the party. And so we were able to embarrass them historically, like in 2006, when the Republicans put the anti-gay marriage amendment on the ballot to change the Constitution. It was already against the law, and they wanted to change the Constitution to make gay marriage forever, ever, never verboten. Clearly a partisan ploy to drive their people to the primary. We couldn't get the party to stand against it. And we passed resolutions up to the precincts. Remember me talking about how we learned from the Christian Coalition that organized their people to go to their precinct meetings, go to the county meetings, get elected to be the state delegates and all. We did that. And we were able to control the resolutions that went to the party. And we had a resolution to oppose that anti-gay marriage amendment. And they blocked it. And we challenged them. And when you challenge the chair, when the chair says you're out of order, you have to have the second from 25% of delegates present. There's 1,000 people in the room. So you had to have 250 people stand up and say, yeah, we want to hear this. And they put the question to the floor, and damn near everybody stood up, like 900 people stood up. And so we got to make that argument. And one of the historic memories is Vince Shaheen's father getting in my face, yelling at me about how we were going to destroy his son's career if we made him take a position on the anti-gay marriage amendment. And so that was an uncomfortable circumstance that we were able to generate based on principle and based on having a direct understanding and relationship and the values of the people that made up the party, not the people that wanted to lead the party. And fast forwarding to 2014, I hate to sound like I'm beating up on Vince, who I think is a really nice guy. Wouldn't want him for my governor. He was running for governor again, and I met with him and Jamie Harrison, who was the chair from 2008 to 2014, and showed them this list of people that we had. There was nearly 250,000 people that had been denied Medicaid, the expansion money, a free Medicaid card. And that Nikki Haley was blocking that, not taking that money. And we'll talk about that in a little while because we had a whole campaign about that. But on the electoral side, we wanted to show Vince that if he knocked on these doors, he could be governor. He raised $4 million, spent some of that, talked to these people. His response was, I can't touch Obamacare. Well, Obamacare was part of the national platform. It was part of the Democratic platform. And after we embarrassed him in 2014, the executive committee of the Democratic Party passed new bylaws to create caucuses. And the caucuses that are now in operation at the Democratic Party, there's a bunch of caucus, they have to support the Democratic Party platform, which is no problem, and they have to support the candidates who don't support the platform, which is a problem. So we quit as a matter of principle. We said we can't support candidates who don't support the platform. And so that's one of the really kind of critical elements to understand about the lack of party. There ain't no party. And if there was a party, they would be taking in the young people that come in and mentoring them and providing them with support. The party would be doing research and analysis and developing good, sound public policies. And Representative Cobb-Hunter can testify they ain't doing that. And that's why she started a progressive caucus of the legislature. And that brings us up to us pulling out the Democratic caucus that we had of the membership. But it's time for people to go back and do that again because it's not working for them. They had progressive caucuses that they started after the 2014 reorganization where your caucus members have to support the candidates. And there's nowhere in America that there are caucuses that are cheerleading squads for the party. Caucuses are, by their nature, interest groups that represent the people in the caucus. So they're not cheerleading squads. So they've perverted the nature of caucuses. And so I'm putting the challenge on everybody that's actually a voter in South Carolina, that's participating in the school, that could be a delegate. Let's sign up and find out what's happening because we need to be in there to be able to play the inside game so we can strengthen our outside game. Gilda, help me with this and wrap it up about the inside
Well,
game.
There's not a lot more that needs to be added to it. I mean, you've been pretty thorough. Bottom line is, whether you call it inside game, outside game, there are two things that are most important, and that is engagement and involvement. And that's the first piece. The second part is flexibility from the standpoint of planning and strategizing. It is not effective, in my view, at least it has not worked for me, to just lock in on one way of doing things or having one strategy and saying, okay, that's it. There has to be, if you're going to be effective, in my view, an ability to change strategies and to figure out what may work. When Brett's talking inside, outside, that to me is just simply another way of saying, it's always been a part of our history that there have been people inside the meeting who have relayed to those outside the meeting pertinent information, depending on what the goal is. So I like to make things plain and keep things simple. It is critical to me that we figure out how to get people engaged, not just in South Carolina, but across the country. And toward that end, I am working, and I know my sister Wilma is on the call and she's aware of this, but something that I have been doing for a number of years now. I am just codifying, and that is the Cobb-Hunter Center for Civic Engagement and Leadership. And I guess I can say you heard it here first. And all that means is just kind of, and I think if you're on this call, there must somewhere be an emphasis on your part in changing things and impacting policy and trying to make the world a better place, to, at the risk of sounding real trite. But we've got to just be focused on not the task and the impossibility of the task, but just on the importance of trying and of trying to get something done. So I feel like I'm rambling, I'm way off point and off topic, but I am one who believes in seeing the glass as half full as opposed to half empty. I am a Democrat, proud of it, but I'm here to tell you that I think we are missing the boat when we try to organize around party labels and what are considered party issues. What I've discovered through the years is that people want to talk about what's important to them and what you intend to do to change that. And quite frankly, there are a lot more people who consider and believe and really are independent in their thinking. It's just from an option standpoint. I would hear say we got two parties. I don't think we got two parties now. We've got one party, and that's the Democratic Party, because the GOP has just become a cult. And crazy people, no offense, but just really, really weird. And so I've said that to say I operate under several, as they say, adages, old folks saying or whatever. And one, of course, is you'd be surprised at what you can get done when you don't care who gets credit, because there are a lot of people who are into doing things because they want to get credit. So if that's your thing, then that's going to probably impact how much you do or don't do. I just believe in doing. And the other thing, and this one, y'all, is so critical to me in this day of Senator Manchin and cinema and blocking voting rights in the U.S. Senate. You know, at some point, when are we going to start whining about Joe Manchin? I am of the opinion that what we need to do is, here's where I'm going with that. I operate under three little words: in spite of. Okay, and so in spite of Joe Manchin, in spite of Kristen Sinema, the good part about where we are is we know they're going to cheat. They've shown us what they're going to do. So I want Democrats to spend less time whining and more time trying to win. The best answer to Joe Manchin, to Kristen Sinema, to McConnell, and anybody else is to win more seats. And so my energies are devoted to doing that. And I am hopeful that those of you who are on the line, regardless of whether you consider yourself Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever, this stuff is serious out here. And I am busy trying to recruit candidates because I know that we need candidates. I want to be like they are in Virginia. In the state of Virginia, the Democratic Party fielded candidates in all 100 seats in the House that are up. We came really close the last cycle, and I will take my hat off to Trav Robertson, who was chair of the Democratic Party, who worked very closely with some of us in the House Democratic Caucus. Forgive the phone, y'all, I can't shut it down, but who worked with us on recruiting candidates. We got to be big. We got to get busy. We know what they're going to do. Now, final thing, and I'll stop at this. This notion of voting rights and the suppression of the vote and all of that. Keep in mind, what they've done is make it harder to vote. They have not made it impossible to vote. And the point I'm making is if they've made it harder, we've got a year and a half almost to try to figure out how to make that hard simpler. You gotta stop wallowing in as I said, I'm a Democrat, but I am sympathetic to those who say it's time for the Democrats to remember who's in charge, because they seem to have forgotten that. And I am not at that level, but politics is pretty simple. I think you have to have a long memory, and what Schumer and company need to do is and all those folk I'm seeing on TV whining about begging Joe Manchin, forget him. He's loving it. He looks like some guy who probably was big man on campus, used to being in the spotlight. He's loving every minute of this. On some levels, he kind of like Trump. Deny him the spotlight, y'all. Let him go on and do what he's going to do. But let's focus on this candidate recruitment, Schumer, and these races, and stop going. Let 2020 be a lesson. And as you are identifying candidates, let it be candidates that people relate to and who really, let me just stop at that because I lost track of what I was saying or what I was supposed to be responding to. Thank you.
Gilda, I've been really gratified that you rejuvenated the Progressive Caucus.
It's a team effort. We're trying.
Well, Representative Cobb-Hunter, people don't know that there is no support mechanism for incoming legislators, but Gilda has, it's very difficult up there, folks. I just really applaud Gilda for sticking with it and can't blame her for needing to get out. And so she's training up some young people. We call them the Gang of Eight, and she met every Thursday this past session. And she told them that if you're here at the grandstand, you're in the wrong room. And Gilda, you got something, you're going to stick with it. Speak just a little bit about the caucus.
The Progressive Caucus, and let me just say, what I did was at the encouragement of some members who are currently in the House, there was a sense that there was no vehicle. Some members felt that there was not an opportunity within the two respective caucuses for them to pursue issues that were important to them. I think that's a nice way to put it. And they had knowledge of something that Joe Neal and I created along with David Mack and Harold Mitchell and some Seth Whipper and some others. Some years ago, we created in cooperation with the Progressive Network, something we call a Progressive Legislative Caucus. And we did that just as a way of being, we were kind of like Bebe's kids. And I don't know, that's so dated, people probably still don't remember when you say Bebe's kids, what that means. But we were kind of troublemakers. And even though like Joe and I have been there, my God, over 20 years, but we still had not been, how shall we say, we hadn't been house trained because we were still radical and doing what we wanted to do and saying what we wanted to say, because we cared about the least of these. So anyway, we created this caucus so we could basically raise hell and have an official way to do it. And more importantly than that, y'all, focus on issues that were important to us. Joe and the work that Wilma and the family is doing with the Joseph H. Neal Health Collaborative is continuing his legacy. Joe was Mr. Healthcare, AIDS activist, all of that. And, we were very much interested in the environment and environmental justice, very, very much interested in rural economic development, redistricting, you name it. Those kinds of issues were important to us. And the Progressive Caucus gave us an opportunity to be able to at least have impact on policy. We got legislation passed under the guise of the Progressive Caucus. With Harold, some environmental justice stuff. We got some election reform stuff, and I'm sure that Brett has talked to y'all about that a little bit. But we were able to get something done, and so fast forward, y'all, to 2020, and we started a year where Democrats lost seats. We lost 2 in the House and 3 in the Senate. And it was kind of like, oh my goodness, are we just here to be a rubber stamp? Are we just here to go along to get along? Are there no issues that we're going to carve out a different position and at least be able to speak to those voices that are not at the table? And so after some urging, we reignited the Progressive Legislative Caucus. And quite frankly, what we've decided to do is to work under the auspices of the Progressive Network, because with the ethics law and being a progressive legislative caucus, we would be considered a special interest caucus. I'm giving y'all way more detail than you care about, but we would be considered a special interest caucus. And as such, there are limitations on the fundraising opportunities. We decided a couple of weeks ago that that's not the path we want to take, because quite frankly, y'all, we want to be about the business of raising money to do the work of organizing here in South Carolina, organizing around progressive issues. We want to work with groups that are out there organizing. We've been working with the network since the inception. We have also created a partnership with Carolina for All, working with them on some voter education, expanding voter rights. So there's work to do, but we can't do it within a legislative caucus because we're serious about what we're doing now, and we need to be able to raise money so that we can do the kind of education and advocacy that we want to talk about. Before I end this, let me tell you something that always amuses me, and this is an example of you'd be surprised at what you can get done if you don't care who gets credit. There are so many of us on this call who are familiar with what we call the Missing Voter Project. That was a project that the Progressive Network created years ago and tried to frame it and get interest in it and talk to candidates, whether gubernatorial, federal, or local, about the importance of the Missing Voter Project and how that, if we just focused on that, that could very well be the margin of difference. And unfortunately, we've had a lot of people who talked about the Missing Voter Project and who have, shall we say, kind of usurped to some extent the origins of the Missing Voter Project. But the bottom line is, that's a treasure, that's a little nugget that's out there. And we want to be able in this next cycle to go after those missing voters. And so I just offer that as 2 things. One, the example of what you can do when you don't care who gets credit, because the network has done it and never gets credit for it. And the other is, that's what we're trying to make sure, that kind of project and other things that we're able, the Progressive Caucus that is, that we're able to be in a position to raise funds to find voters and educate voters, and not September and October of 2022. That's work we're doing now. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you,
Brett, may I pose a question to Gilda, please?
Sure, Phil.
I'll preface the question. Gilda, when I was there in the early 80s, Harriet Cosling started the Women's Caucus. Mm-hmm. And I had a high regard for Harriet to this day. And so I went and took a look, and I joined the Women's Caucus. I was their master.
I remember. Mm-hmm.
I found that to be the most progressive group, willing to discuss hard issues. Most men in the legislature don't spend time talking about issues. They spend time talking about their law practice, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. I found that to be the most productive place that I went during my time there. Is it still, and isn't the key to success, like with Senator Jones down in Alabama, getting women, Black women, white women who have a like mind together to push things through? Because I just never saw a place where we got more significant issues discussed and some actually hashed out than that women's caucus.
Yeah, I would say no to your first question. Is it like that now? And yes, to your second question, yes, we need women doing things. And let me tell you, let me go back to your first question. Back then, you had different kinds of women. You had, it wasn't quite as partisan. So you had women like June Shishis and Holly Cork and these kind of Republican women who recognized that they were Republican women, but they were about policy. And it was, back then you could disagree on policy issues. Policy has very little to do with disagreements or policy in the South Carolina legislature. What we have, for the most part, are a group of men and women who are just glad to be there. They take their little notes from Alec, you know, in the Republican, whatever the national GOP says, it all just kind of trickles down. It's like a cookie cutter approach. It doesn't matter what state, it's the same legislature. And for me, Phil, that has to be one of the most disheartening things, and that is the women, because of what you described. When the women, and I wasn't there when the caucus formed, but I certainly, once I was elected, was involved in the caucus. It's not like that anymore. It's more like a little social kind of thing. The women are, shall we say, the women, like the men, and this is on both sides of the aisle, so I'm not just picking on Republicans, they are spinally challenged. They are not real interested in taking positions that might not be popular with who they perceive as their base. And so as a result, there's more of a lemons falling off the cliff kind of aspect. They go along with whatever the leader says is the plan. And that's unfortunate. And particularly, it's so frustrating to have people say to you, you know, you were right. Okay, if I was right, why you didn't vote with me? Well, you know, I can't do that because then they'll primary me. And so that goes back to why you're there in the first place.
Let me tell you about a guy with whom I disagreed some, but I respected, and that was Arthur Ravenel.
Yeah.
And the reason I disagreed with him some was questions of policy. But Arthur had been in the legislature in the 50s and realized he needed to go home and make some money. He came back in the 80s and stayed involved in legislative, congressional, and then back to legislative things for the next 20 years. Part of the problem with so many people I see there is once they grab hold of a position and a title, they feel like they can't let it go or it'll never come back. And Arthur and some others on the Democratic side let go, went home after they'd had a taste of it, thought it was good, and were able to come back. I wish the legislature would train people to understand, and I guess the citizenry needs to do that too, that you can leave and you can come back. Not when you're 75, by the way, I'm 75, not coming back. But when people get in at 20, like David Beasley, they need to be out for a while and then they can get back in and bring some life experience to the table. But I really do think that the key to the future is finding women with extraordinarily strong backs and extraordinarily intense minds to lead us on policy. And that's why I've always admired you a great deal.
You're kind. Well, I would use that as a segue to those of you who are on the call. We are looking for women to run for the South Carolina House If you know of someone, please email their name to me or to Nick Satilli, who is our director. Jump on in, the ward is fine. But again, I hate to sound like a wet blanket, but it's not enough to just say we're recruiting women. We need women with conviction. We need women who are going to stand for those who can't be there. We need women who aren't just there for the title and the tags. And unfortunately, that describes not just a lot of women, but a lot of men as well.
All right, guys, I'm going to move the agenda now because we've got about another 15 years to cover in about another 20 minutes.
Oh, my.
So thank you so much, both of you. But I want to talk about the policy work that we've done. Now, policy has to have some type of ability to be legislation, or it's not policy. But the policy work that we find, there's this old saying in organizing, you find out where people itch and you show them how to scratch. And so some of the things that we've picked up in terms of policy work has been like racial discrimination. How do you have a policy against racial discrimination? You can't outlaw racism. We decided early in the game, in the first meeting, that racism was the largest problem that affected everything else. So how do you take a bite out of that in a substantive way? Well, we came up with, in 2000, I did research and spent a whole lot of time doing it, and came up with a rather shocking numbers that there are more Black people arrested in South Carolina per capita than anywhere, literally. Nearly 10% of the entire Black population arrested every year. And that if you narrowed it down, you threw out the infants and the extreme elderly, you narrow down to this segment of young Black men that are being arrested on levels that are genocidal in terms of like wiping out a population, breaking up family home. So what we came up with was, let's look at the criminal justice system because there's statistics, there's body counts there. There's a talk in vague numbers about, morality. And so we introduced, I wrote it, Joe and Gilda sponsored it, legislation for all cops to report all stops. Introduced it, and I think it was in 2002. But before we introduced it, we put the question on the floor for discussion: is racial profiling a problem in South Carolina? We knew that it was, but we had town hall meetings in Columbia and Charleston, standing room only. People coming in telling horror stories about being stopped, driving while Black, walking while Black. And so we did these town hall meetings. We got the community involved. We generated pressure. We had panels. Ernest Finney and Joe Neal were on the panels, and local cops. And then we introduced the legislation. And we introduced it right before, I think it was right before 9/11, which kind of set racial profiling back a bit. And it wasn't until 2006 that we had an opportunity to move it. So one of our tactics is to prepare ourselves to take advantage of opportunities. So we had a bill. The opportunity came about when the federal government told South Carolina that if you don't pass a mandatory seatbelt bill, we're going to deny you hundreds of millions of dollars a year in federal highway money. And so Sanford vetoed the seatbelt bill. It looked like we were going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars. The Republicans went to the Black Caucus, said, help us. We got to override Sanford's veto. And the caucus that Gilda and Joe were working with at the time said, we want our racial profiling bill. And they said, okay. And we said, hooray. And it passed and became law. And it was nearly a year later, 6 months later, it comes back to the Senate Transportation Committee to see how the Department of Public Safety implemented the regulations. And all cops don't report all stops now, but all cops do report stops that they question people and let them go. Like warning tickets, they call it public contact report. And those public contact reports are now, by law, required of all 300 plus police agencies in South Carolina that can stop you and talk to you. They have to report every month the race, gender, and age of the people that they stop. And so we've come in from a rather progressive position, got a Republican legislature to adopt something we wanted, and it's law. And we can use that as an organizing tool because every police agency in South Carolina, most people have at least two looking over the municipal one, a county one, and that you can go to the Department of Public Safety website, check contact reports, and there's Daniel showing you this It drop down that thing, Daniel. There's every cop agency in South Carolina. All I'm scroll through that goes all the way down to York, I think is a Y. And so that is something that Gilda and Joe put into law, that we did the research on, that now everybody in South Carolina, all the cops have to do that. That's capacity, folks. That's getting something done. Using policy, finding that itch that people have to scratch. And that itch is that you're discriminating against people of color with the criminal justice system. So finding some way to articulate that and making a plan and getting it passed. It's something that's an organizing tool that people can use. Thank you, Daniel. And that we did with a photo ID. The photo ID was another attempt to suppress voter turnout in South Carolina. And we fought that from the beginning, tooth and toenail. And we found a dozen people that couldn't vote under the stringent rules of the photo ID bill. We submitted that stuff to the Department of Justice because in 2013, 2012, this actually started in 2008. It took them till 2013 to get it passed. But that they were requiring birth certificates to have a driver's license. And a lot of people didn't have birth certificates, they couldn't vote. So we found people that couldn't vote. Georgia and Texas had already passed the photo ID bill. They never found anybody that couldn't vote. We did. And so that work, going out and meeting people, and this guy, hold right there, Larry Butler was our poster boy. Larry Butler was at 90-something years old when we talked about him, born at home at his aunt and uncle's house in 1930-something, and never had a birth certificate. Served in the military, graduated from Benedict College, and then he came home, I think it was like 2008, to like vote for Obama. He registered to vote, and they wouldn't let him register because he didn't have the right ID. And so Larry was going to be one of the people that couldn't vote. And so this is a press conference in the lobby of the legislature, right outside the governor's door for the governor's wing of the State House lobby. The governor had just finished a press conference, right 20 feet across from us, where she was playing the Black Eyed Peas, It's a Beautiful Day. And she had all her white friends talking about how wonderful it was to make people have to have a photo ID. And the governor said, you need a photo ID to buy an airplane ticket, you need a photo ID to buy Sudafed, you need a photo ID to vote. And that was Larry Butler a second ago holding up a plane ticket that he had just bought with no photo ID. He also had a box of Sudafed that he bought with no photo ID because he had a Michigan driver's license that you couldn't trade for a South Carolina one with a birth certificate. And so we stopped the photo ID bill at the Department of Justice back when all voting changes in South Carolina, like other states that in the 1965 Voting Rights Act, states with a racial history of suppression, had to have any voting changes pre-cleared by the Department of Justice before they could go into effect. And so we stopped them. We prevented the photo ID bill from passing. Nikki appealed, spent $4 million appealing. The case went to the appeals court that hears these things in Washington, D.C. And the appeals court, Gilda, I think you went up there. Did you go up there, Gilda, for that hearing?
Yeah, me, Brad Hutto, and Gerald Malloy.
And Gerald discovered the issue. But the arguments at the hearing were taken over by the judges, and the judge kind of basically rewrote the law. And so the opinion, the ruling, the order on allowing a photo ID bill to go forward in South Carolina was written by this guy I didn't know at the time named Brett Kavanaugh.
Yep.
And so what he did was, I refer to it as the Solomonic wisdom of cutting the baby in half so nobody wins. He created this thing called the reasonable impediment. That Larry Butler, you don't have a birth certificate, you can vote anyway. And so the photo ID bill went forward, and on page 2 of the opinion, I'll send anybody that doesn't believe it, it says, the photo ID bill that we're approving here today is not the photo ID bill passed by the South Carolina legislature. Right. They rewrote it. And so we won, but it was so complicated, we lost. So the idea of confusing people by suppressing the vote worked. And so that's what Kavanaugh managed to do, is he said, okay, we're not going to keep you from voting, but we're going to require a photo ID unless you have a reason, and that's the reasonable impediment. So it just got so complicated. But We kind of lost that one, but we kind of won that one. But we quit fighting it and telling people, just go get your photo ID voter registration card that you don't even need a driver's license to get. You don't need a birth certificate. So there is no real requirement other than the confusion. So that was a fight that we waged well, kind of won some of. Gilda, you got anything to add about the photo ID
I
thing?
would say just add that in the minds of a lot of people, we won, myself included. It's kind of like taking the lemon and making lemonade. We won in the sense that thanks to Kavanaugh's ruling or opinion, you were pretty much able to vote for any reason without the ID. The impediment language just loosened it up tremendously. So that made it a whole lot better than what the General Assembly passed.
And that reasonable impediment became something that people around the country were holding up as some winning thing. And right after in 2013, which was shortly thereafter, the Supreme Court in a case, Shelby County versus Holder, Shelby County, Tennessee, sued Eric Holder, the Attorney General, saying that Eric Holder,
Shelby, Alabama.
Ma'am?
Shelby County, Alabama.
I thought it was in Tennessee, but Shelby County, and that they said we're post-racial. We got a black president. We don't need this Section 5 anymore, where you got to look over our shoulder and make us pretty clear things. The Supreme Court agreed with them. So South Carolina, as well as other southern states, as well as some other districts that they'd added in about language discrimination, lost the coverage that we'd had since 1965 of pre-clearance. They couldn't pass a law until everybody got a chance to pick at it. And so that I wrote a bill that Gilda sponsored that we introduced in the House Election Law Subcommittee in front of Alan Clemens, who was the sponsor of the photo ID bill. Not exactly a fellow that wanted to make voting easier. Alan actually had a bill. This is when we won the hearts and minds of the bureaucrats that ran the elections. Clemens had a bill to let everybody vote on the same day. So we should all vote in the same 12 hours as a show of patriotism. And so you've got like 3,000 precincts in the state, run by people that are poorly paid, organized by 46 county election directors that are saying, wait a minute, we've got 30 days to do our job and you want us to do it in 12 hours, the same amount of money, the same number of people? You're crazy. And so that's where we really won a lot of hearts and minds of the election bureaucrats. But the legislation passed. We convinced Alan Clemens that there was no list. Nobody knew for the first time since 1965 what laws were being changed on municipal and local levels. And so now another website that we created with Gilda's help, at the South Carolina Election Commission, you can go and look under General and click on recent voting changes. And all voting changes in South Carolina, all of them, from the 3,000 local elections to the legislative elections changes, have to be posted there 35 days before they take effect. It doesn't stop them, but it gives somebody a chance to vet them and look at them. That somebody should be us. It should be somebody we can organize. And anybody that wants to help do that, you're welcome to. Gilda, got something to add about that victory with the section? We call it Section 5 registry.
No, it was just a really interesting experience to be the only non-lawyer testifying before a 3-judge panel. It made me feel like, oh, you're in, as they say, you're in high cotton.
I want to quickly move on because we want to take some time to open up for questions. To doing some of the stuff in money and politics that we've done has been consistent. We introduced one of the first things we worked on was disclosure of campaign finances. And the South Carolina was the last state in the nation to have something the public could see on the web. And we introduced a bill and the legislature said, we can't afford it. So we got a $10,000 grant and we hired students and retired people and rented 2 copy machines, rolled them into the state election commission and copied an entire election cycle, $600, and sent it to the National Institute on Money and State Politics, and they keyed it in. So we created the first searchable database of campaign contributions in 1998, I think it was. And we embarrassed them. And the next year they found some money and they created the South Carolina Ethics Commission now has a website that is torturously bad. And I'm sure that the people that they hired to create it laughed in their martinis, watching the poor peasants trying to figure out how to find out who gave Cobb-Hunter money. And now there's the followthemoney.org, incredible site where you can go and you can put in Gilda's name and find out everybody that's given her money, or you can put in Henry McMaster's name and find out, as well as him, the legislators that were dumped money by the hospitality industry to ensure that Henry's COVID response was designed by the National Restaurant Association with minimum wage people that they did not want any restrictions on. And so when you follow them on, you can connect the dots and see who's actually driving the train. And we'll be doing a class on how you use this database after this graduation ceremony in July 3rd, when this class graduates. We'll be doing some what we call skills and tool sessions for organizing. And this will be when we come back to. So thank you, Daniel. And so that the other things that we've done that are still pending because they're still relevant, we introduced a whole package of anti-corruption legislation. And it's been reintroduced for this session, so it'll still be hot next year. We need to try and force some hearings on it. But one of the things that's just so common sense was that Representative Cobb-Hunter and others sponsored a bill that if you're a legislator and you get caught stealing your campaign donations and that you force a special election to replace you, you should pay for that special election, with your ill-gotten gains. And we introduced that bill before my legislator, Rick Quinn, and John Krangle, who's our government affairs guy, his senator, John Courson, my representative, Rick Quinn, were both indicted for stealing the campaign money. And what it turns out is that I have to pay more because I'm putting up the county share and the state share to replace the crook. And so it's just real common sense. This should be restitution. When we presented that with amicus filings with the judge that heard some of the cases, and she wouldn't even hear it. So this is something we got to lean on Cobb-Hunter to get a hearing on this restitution bill that people steal money. They should pay for the special election. We had some other good ideas there, but we don't have time to go into them. But we'll share those with people that want to know them. Gilda, got something to say about corruption? I'm willing to go to jail, but it ain't gonna be about money. So the moral budget rally, we need to show a clip of that. We're running out of time because we want to save 30 minutes to talk. Daniel, cue up that first. Well, there's 3 of them, and they're only like a minute and a half long. Go through those. This is a moral budget that happened. Let me set it up. In 2010, the Republican legislature called for a tax realignment commission assessment of where's the money coming from. And they got the study back. It's 680 pages long, and very few people read it. But what turns out is that we're leaving more money on the table than we're taking up. We have all these special interest tax exemptions, like porta toilets only have to pay like 1/3 as much as regular people. They have really good lawyers, and that the cap on vehicles and airplanes and yachts was it $300? It's $300, and they raised it to $500. But if you just raise the tax on yachts and airplanes, it would have been enough to actually pay for the Medicaid expansion. So all these exemptions are cutting into the interest by special interest. And so when the tax commission came back and said, we've got like an extra $2.5 billion, we said, oh boy, you can pay the bills for the school. There's 2 statutory things that are in the budget. One is government, local government support, and I think that's 4%. And then the other is student, per capita student payments. We haven't met either one of those in years and years and years. So if you got extra money, meet your obligations. And they said, no, we want to reduce taxes. And so we had a moral budget question. And that's what the rally was about. Daniel?
Let's be clear. Let's be clear about why we're here. Yes, sir. Let's be clear about what we're going to do now that we're here. Yeah. First, let me tell you that we're here demanding justice. And lastly, let me tell you what we're going to do. We're going to keep on demanding. On Monday, the House will begin deliberations on the budget. And on Monday, we want you to come and pack the hall. We want you to look these legislators in the face and tell them we want a moral budget. They need to hear from you and people like you. Because too often those who dwell and work in this building behind me never get to see the people they hurt. This time it's going to be different. This time they're going to hear from the people. And I hope that you agree with me in saying that to those who say there is no use, that there's nothing that can be done, that things are going to be the way they're going to be, I hope you join with me in saying to them, that's a lie.
That was Representative Joe Neal, the chair of the Progressive Network. And Dan, you want to play those other, there's a clip that follows that, the Rally for More Budget, Stop the Cut slideshow. No, let's not do the slideshow. You've got video that shows the mob the lobby. That's what we want to see, is mob the lobby. Joe calls for people to turn out. This was on a Saturday, the rally was. He calls for people to turn out the subsequent Monday to make their voices heard. And this is what happened in the lobby. Does it?
That's what you see on the news.
We stopped the session, and the next clip, Daniel, do the one that is Sweet Victory, and this is a meeting, a Progressive Network meeting shortly after that, where Representative Neal talks about what happened after we stopped the cuts there that day.
I said there were 400 people out on the step with signs, and a group of them at that moment were in the lobby and started chanting, which is not allowed.
Stop the cuts! Stop the cuts! Stop the cuts!
And the speaker's eye got this big. I said, they're coming. so he said, we'll work out something. Okay, so we, instead of having 20% cuts, we had what?
5% cuts.
And a lot of things didn't get cut that would have gotten cut. So a lot of it, whether it received any press or not, that rally had an impact.
Yeah, and stop that, Dan. And the impact that Joe Neal talked about was $380 million that was put back into the budget. So we made $380 million that day with some signs. Now that we've got a few more things we want to do. We run a little over on time. People that have to leave at 8:30 can, but we want to save time for questions. But Daniel, let's go to the Truthful Tuesday stuff, because this is an example of an analysis and a strategy and a tactics that follows what can we get done here. We knew we were not going to get Medicaid expansion passed. This was one of the most impactful things that I've ever been involved in, because we, the Progressive Network, ended up being navigators to help people learn how to get into the insurance pool of the Affordable Care Act. That there was $50 million the state turned down to use state agencies to do that. And the states, Nikki Haley's leadership against Medicaid expansion was the most vicious in the nation. We turned down every possible thing you could do. The hospitals, with the whole idea was to give the people that couldn't afford insurance a free Medicaid card. So there was a cutoff. You had to make above the 136% of the minimum wage to get the insurance. So if you made less than that, you're in like a real poverty level. It was $15,600. And so if you made $15,500 and the person next to you flipping burgers made $100 more than you are, they could get a free insurance policy through the Affordable Care Act. But you couldn't. You had to pay $3,000-$4,000 for the same policy because you had less money. Because you had less money, you were supposed to get a free Medicaid card. It was so complicated. I was at a meeting with Jean Toll when she was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. She had no idea that we turned down a free Medicaid card for people that couldn't afford insurance, that were living below the poverty level. And so, Daniel, let's start with that moral budget rally. We just did that. Now we're down to the Truthful Tuesday. Let's show that arrest there. I think with one of our friends is getting arrested, blocking the entrance to the parking garage where all the legislators came in. This is during the debate at the legislature.
If you guys don't leave the roadway now, I'm giving you a warning. If you guys don't leave the roadway, we're going to have to take you into custody. You're breaking the law. All right? This is city property. You understand that? You all. I need you to turn around, please. Put your hands on your back.
Let me take this so I can do some
Okay.
so I can keep it.
I'll put them in front, okay? I'll bring them up for you. Good. You're not resisting. I understand what you guys are trying to do. You know, we got to enforce the law.
So Daniel, let that play, but turn the sound off so I can talk over it. That's Reverend Summers there getting arrested by the chief of police at the time. The chief of police told me he had no idea before we did this that the government turned down money that would have provided nearly 4,000 homeless people in South Carolina, in Columbia, just in Columbia, 4,000 homeless people in Columbia, free Medicaid card. Because he explained, he says, the cops are like social workers with guns. And he couldn't believe why we did that. Nor could the Supreme Court justice understand why on earth we did that. And so we were really flummoxed as to how we couldn't make headway on that fight. And but we did raise hell. And the idea was to change the dialogue inside the legislature. And so while this was 2013, it was passed, and the 2014 session comes in. That arrest you saw was one of 3 different waves that we had 39 people arrested, ratcheting up the discussion in the media and whatnot. And we changed the dialogue inside. They said they weren't going to talk about Medicaid expansion. Nikki said, no way. And the House talked for 3 weeks, passed a bill to nullify Obamacare. They were going to nullify a federal law, which they tried to do in 1861, didn't work out well. Sent it to the Senate, and it died in the Senate after 3 weeks of debate. So the total of 6 weeks of debate as to how we were going to turn down $1.4 billion that year to take care of 6 people with our tax money. Gilda, you do recall that.
Yep.
And so what else? The other thing that we want to do before we take questions is to very briefly show you, Daniel, show that flicker thing of the day that, this is the day after Trump was inaugurated in Columbia in 2017, January. And we hosted an event that, go ahead and show that and I'll talk over it, Daniel, it's a slideshow. That we hosted an event that was going to be on the State House grounds, but it was pouring down rain. We rented a facility across the street. This is the music farm that holds 2,000 people. We had another 2,000 outside in the rain, packed it. 40-something organization on the stage. And Gilda couldn't be with us that day. So we had go ahead and click through these, Daniel. There was a Jumbotron up on the ceiling here, right there it is. And that Gilda gave a little introduction there to this crowd that was really a wonderful crowd. And that she said, we didn't set out to be a secret society. And so the next day, it became real clear that we were still a secret society because the state newspaper ran the story. It was a big story with thousands of people, and they were protesting the fact that Trump was the president. And they ran the story with pictures above the fold on the front page and didn't even mention the Progressive Network. So that's kind of the stream we've been swimming against in terms of being able to use the media to get our story out. And the work that we did there is the type of work that needs to be carried on. But we need fresh blood where we are now after 25 years. Becky and I are trying to step back. We've got to find some new people to do this. And so we need people we're going to be sending out something to everyone real soon about reformulating the structure of the Progressive Network and needing your help to do so. And what I'd like to do now, Daniel, it's 8:16 now. Robert, let's go to the floor with questions if you have any, and we can let Representative Cobb-Hunter wrap up if she's got something to say.
All right. So any questions at all from the audience? I know that we've had to really think deeply about the last 30 years of history here in South Carolina in terms of what it means for activism and organizing. So any questions at all from the audience? Marjorie, I see you have your hand raised.
But she doesn't have her own. You're muted, Marjorie.
Trying to do that. How's that now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Gilda, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. Good to see you.
Some other members of the caucus, some of the current people in your caucus. You don't want to answer that question?
Oh, I'm waiting for you. You mean in the Democratic caucus?
No, she's talking about the Progressive caucus.
In the Progressive.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're asking who they are?
Yeah. I just thought that some of the people would be interested.
Sure. We have one senator, and that's Mike Fanning.
Okay.
We have Representative Wendy Brawley, Representative Jermaine Johnson, Representative Kim Johnson, our newer member, Representative Crystal Matthews, Representative Michael Rivers, Representative, I'm drawing a blank on, Representative Cambrell Garvin, and in this one more, I'm forgetting. Oh, I'm embarrassed.
It's okay.
John King. John King, thank you.
Okay.
So it's 9 of us.
Good, good, good.
And we are, Marge, thanks for that question. We are very selective about membership. When Joe and I started this initially, it was based on people who not only shared our political philosophy, but who also had the conviction to people we thought we could count on in a foxhole if we were in a foxhole.
And what I'm going to ask Brett or somebody to do is to take that list and add their districts so that the people on this will know where those people are. Okay?
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
All right. I see Mary Rita Watson has her hand raised. Go ahead, please.
I might be one of the, I don't know, the newbies in the group with not much knowledge of politics. So my question is, what does the structure look like? Like you were referring to caucuses and then parties, and I put a question in the chat, but it didn't get answered. Like, does the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have caucuses? Is that how? I guess I just need to see the big picture.
Sure. I'd be happy to respond to that. Thanks for the question. Both parties have caucuses. I'm not sure how many within the Republican caucus, within the Republican Party. I'm sure they have some kind of women's caucus and probably some faith-based caucus. So I'm not as familiar with what caucuses are within the Republican Party, but I'm pretty certain that if you go to their website, they would have that information. On the Democratic Party side, and I'm speaking just about the state party, not about the DNC, the national party. the point Brett was making is we kind of started out with the Women's Caucus within the South Carolina Democratic Party. Back during the history, he was given, some of us ne'er-do-wells came together and created what we call the Progressive Caucus. And for a while, it was the Women's Caucus, the Progressive Caucus. The Progressive Caucus started doing breakfasts at Democratic conventions. The Women's Caucus joined with us to do that. So we went from those two that I'm aware of, and there may have been one more, to now we have the Seniors Caucus, the Rural Caucus, the Black Caucus, the Progressive Caucus, the Labor Caucus. It's several. And just to make sure that I'm giving accurate information, I would encourage you to go to the South Carolina Democratic Party's website, because I know they have a listing of all of their caucuses.
But what the party did, the Democratic Party did in creating this multiplicity of caucuses, is they separated people. And before we had one caucus, then we had a lot of power because everybody understood who the enemy was and what we had in common. And so that's a lesson there. Wilma's got her hand up there. Robert?
Yes, Wilma Guerin, go ahead, please, with your question.
Yes, I'm curious to know, in light of not having gotten the Medicaid expansion and you're being able to quantify in everybody's district how many of their members did not get served. Did we use that to run people for office? Will we use that information? If I don't know if you can actually get names of people, but to be able to say, okay, in this representative's district, here are the people who got no medical coverage because they didn't take Medicaid expansion. Did we do anything like that to stir up their base? Is that something that's possible to be done?
Our education fund cannot, but our individual members can, and we have very successfully used that as a organizing tool. The most recently was in Samuel Rivers district. Samuel was this is our C4 now. This is not our nonpartisan work. This is putting our other hat on. And so with the game being as rigged as it is, the Progressive Network looks at where can we actually make a difference? Where will it make a difference when we participate? And so we knew that this Samuel Rivers was the only Black person in the Republican side of the House. And that we knew it was a fairly closely contested district. And so we looked at who didn't get Medicaid expansion in that district. And we mailed 5,600 postcards to people that we were able to identify with some degree of assurance that did not have insurance, and posed to them, this guy wants you to have insurance, this guy doesn't, we can't tell you who to vote for. Gilda Cobb-Hunter made a robocall speaking the same point and put our phone number in the robocall that Amari Fox took the call. 120 people called. So it was novel that you don't normally get somebody to phone number that you can call and talk to somebody. But the person that won, J.A. Moore, won. His sister was one of the people that was killed in Mother Emanuel. Mr. Moore didn't even know we did it. And so he was advised after he got in office. And so that's the type of strategic hit that we've been doing that that works. And so yeah, we
so
have
but did he step up after knowing that you won? Did he step up now to push behind and join forces with you? I didn't hear his name called as part of the Progressive
that's
Caucus.
part of our not having enough people, enough staff, enough capacity to follow up on taking advantage of the good things that we do. We did get rid of the only Republican in the House that was a Black person, but Gilda, you got anything to say about?
Well, in terms of the using that data as a recruitment tool, unfortunately, because as Democrats, we have been we have not been as strong from a messaging standpoint as we could be. So there are a number of candidates, potential candidates out there who probably just did not feel that it would be in their best interest to run, all that data notwithstanding, because unfortunately we are living in an age where misinformation, alternative facts, shall we say, seem to rule the day. So it's like, I'm not sure. So what you're saying is logic. And unfortunately, logic doesn't always rule the day in politics, in this country, in this state. Go figure.
Well, what's
Gene
the
Hammock,
plan? What's the plan moving forward?
The plan, we as a progressive network, our plan is to do voter education, mobilize, work, partner with groups like the network, like Carolina for All, the groups that are out there on the ground doing stuff. And to just keep focused and keep working and not worry about who's not doing what, but do whatever it is we can. And Tom is on here. He's a Methodist minister. There's an adage I keep messing up from the Methodist Church about do all the good you can while you can for as long as you can. Okay, that's my philosophy. I'm Baptist, but that's what I believe in that. I butchered it, but you understand what I'm talking about.
Wilma, we have a game plan that runs through 2022 that is encapsulated at missingvoterproject.com. Missingvoterproject.com is something we've been doing since 2004 that looks at the 500,000 registered Black people that aren't voting because it doesn't make any difference in their lives. And we're the only team that goes and finds these people and says, we agree with you. And talk to them about how that can make a difference. And so the difference that can be made in 2022 is outlined in the Missing Voter Project on a statewide basis. That's the place that we can make a difference because the statewide district can't be gerrymandered and 500,000 people of color can actually decide who gets to be governor in South Carolina in 2022. More questions?
Thank you.
I think Jean Hammock has her hand as well for a question.
I wanted to know, do you only belong to one caucus or can you belong to a couple of caucuses? Because I see putting caucuses together to give us more strength. How does that caucus work?
In the Democratic Party, you can belong to more than one caucus. You can be a member of the Black Caucus, the Progressive Caucus, the Rural Caucus, the Senior Caucus. And in fairness to the party, what I think the intent of their effort in creating all of these caucuses is simply, you know, we Democrats like everybody to feel like they're special and wanted. And so we diversify sometimes to the point of dilution in some people's mind. And so, hell, we want everybody to feel belonging. Everybody have a group. So they create all these caucuses. So people have some place to land, a space that they feel safe in, I think is the rationale behind it. But I don't think there's a limit on the number of caucuses you can join.
Let me address the
Gene, you know, Keith Gray is one of our students this session, and Keith is the operative chair of the Progressive Caucus. But that y'all need to join all the caucuses you want to and talk about the strength of unity.
Right.
Yes. Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Brett, let me talk about the caucuses from a different perspective. After I left the legislature, I began to work with firefighters, try to raise money for those guys. Wonderful men and women. I just love them. I suggested to them as a method to get in touch with legislators that they get together with police, EMS and others, and ask leaders in the legislature to start a first responders caucus. Here was the logic, okay? The logic was you invite these people. We got a fire chief in there who's a member of the Senate. We got some police sheriffs. Here's the logic. The logic is legislators are bombarded all the time with information. I've got a friend from the Air National Guard who used to say, in confusion, there's profit. That sounds like the Republican Party now. But anyway, all that notwithstanding, my purpose in suggesting that was so that firefighters, police, and EMS could get FaceTime with legislators to tell them facts, okay? Because the problem now is is you get bombarded with stuff, and some of it's not true. Hard to tell which is which. But when you get legislators to identify with things like firefighters and the like, then that gives fighters a chance to come together. The conservation people have done it. I was always involved in conservation and the environment. And once a year, the Conservation Caucus, which is made up of legislators, okay, the Environmental Caucus, they agree to have people from all these wildlife conservation folks and whatnot come to the legislature and talk to them. It's not an adversarial kind of thing. It's not an advocating kind of thing where you're asking for their vote. You're just trying to inform them. And but all the, you know, as individual members of the Progressive Caucus, which I admire a great deal. And by the way, I'm the official pilot of the Progressive Caucus because I've flown Brett to court hearings and not enough, but some. But the point is that you've got to find ways to be a truth teller and to bring facts to people. You can do it on an individual basis. Your individual legislator will listen to you. Now, if I call a legislator in Greenville, unless we're personal friends from the past, they don't have any time for me, and I understand it because they got, each member of the House has what, 40,000 and each member of the Senate has 105, 110,000. But anyway, the point is that it's time for one-on-one fact telling and truth sharing, and it can make a difference. Gilda has told you stories. Brett has told you stories of where being at the right place at the right time with facts has made a difference.
So we've reached the end of our 2-hour class, and what we normally do is take a pause, and those that want to stay and chat more can stay and chat more, and those that need to leave can leave. But we didn't quite get finished as we normally run out of time to try and shrink 30 years into 2 hours. But Gilda and Phil, I really do appreciate you, the work that you've been doing for so long, and imagine you will keep doing it for as long as you can. But I also know that you're working hard, and we're helping to fill the void that you will leave when you depart from the legislature. So, Danny, we got music to keep. Well, anybody got anything to say goodbye now? I want to appreciate.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. But I know what we want to do. We want to sing happy birthday to Dr. Green. And so his birthday is, I think, Thursday, isn't it, Robert?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, and so everybody unmute and let's sing happy birthday to Dr. Green. Happy birthday,
to you. Happy birthday to you.
God, that was terrible. Happy birthday, dear Robert.
To you.
Happy birthday
to you.
And Lord, I hope you have better singers than that in your birthday party, Robert. But thank you all. We're going to take a short break.
Daniel's Thanks, everyone.
Going to play.
Thank y'all.
Play something here.
Good night.
Another show Monday week. So let's take a break and get a drink or go to the bathroom, and we'll come back.
Look at those pictures.
But Joseph, you had some thoughts about what we did wrong, what we did right? In the beginning, God stepped out in space. No. Said, let there be progressive now. Amen. There was. Amen. Let me first say, 20 years seems like yesterday. It really does. But Becky put up this picture of us down at Penn Center, and I looked at it and I went, who are those people? They're slim, right? They had hair, right? All of this stuff, right? And now look at us. See what working in progressive fields do for you. Okay. All I can tell you is it's been a labor of love. It's been a learning experience. Brett and Becky have been unbelievable in the drive and the commitment and the work that they have done over the years. I can't even begin to detail for you all of the things that they have done. You know, they talk about us, but they're the ones who really do the work, who really have been on the field and really have fought the battles. I want you to understand that without these two people, South Carolina would be a very difficult place, a very difficult place to be. You know, they've done a lot to make things better, and I appreciate you.
Yeah,
I appreciate you. See, that's not fanaticism. Well, some people call it fanaticism, other people call it faith. Okay? I call it faith. You know, always have the determination and the faith that things could be better, even when the odds said you're out of your mind. Okay. The reality is that I've enjoyed working with the Progressive Network. Gilda and I have been sweet mates for a long time, right? And so we share information a lot. And I've watched with great interest a lot of things that she's done and learned a lot from her. You know, she's my senior in the legislature. She's a young thing, but she got in the legislature 6 months before I did. But she got there before I did. Matter of fact, I'm here because she made me. Okay? The reality is, though, you will find in this band of fellows and brothers and sisters,
Yes.
a camaraderie that will last a lifetime, because you're actually making change. And change never comes easy, always comes with a price, but it's worth paying, because people's lives are enriched, people's lives are extended, freedoms are expanded, and all I can tell you, it's been a joy to have a small piece in working for all of that. Thank you.
We miss him. He's irreplaceable. He was such a moral center and just such a pure and clean energy that we really needed, and I hope we can manifest it, some of it each of ourselves. Was that Wilma saying amen for me?
Amen.
Miss him greatly.